Yulia Navalny, the widow of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, has accused Vladimir Putin of killing her husband and vowed to continue his work. In a video posted on social media platform X, she called on supporters to resist Putin and to fight for a free Russia. It has been 3 days since Russian authorities announced Navalny's death. So far, they have prevented his family and allies from seeing his body.
It's a video Yulia Navalnaya said she didn't want to make, calling out Russian President Vladimir Putin for murdering her husband. In the days since Alexei Navalny's death, his wife has made it clear she won't be intimidated into silence.
3 days ago, Vladimir Putin killed my husband, Alexei Navalny. Putin killed the father of my children. Putin took away the dearest thing I had, the closest and most beloved person.
Russian authorities have so far refused to hand over Navalny's body to his family. His mother went to the investigative office near the prison where her son died to get his body and left empty-handed. A Kremlin spokesperson condemned Navalnaya's statements and said the death was being investigated according to law. Navalnaya calls it a cover-up for a second poisoning of her husband after an attempt to kill him with the nerve agent Novichok failed in 2020.
In a mean and cowardly fashion, they are now hiding his body, not showing it to his mother or giving it to her, and pathetically lying and waiting for the traces of more of Putin's Novichok to disappear.
At Moscow's Wall of Grief, mourners have left bouquets and messages for Alexei Navalny in the snow. The site commemorates victims of Soviet repression. In an environment where it's dangerous to show public grief for Navalny, it's the closest thing to an official memorial for the opposition leader.
And Navalny's widow, Yulia Navalny, has just finished a meeting with EU policy chiefs and foreign ministers in Brussels. The talks come as the EU considers what further sanctions it can take against Russia in the wake of her husband's death. The EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, said that it was vital that whatever action is taken both honors Navalny and continues his work.
We have to send a message of support to the Russian opposition and to pay an homage to Navalny. And in order to honor his memory, we propose the ministers to rename our human rights sanctions regime with his name and call it the Navalny Human Rights Sanctions Regime, in order for his name to be forever written on the work of the European Union on defending human rights.
DW correspondent Christine Mundwa is following the developments in Brussels. So, Christine, we understand that there have been calls for further sanctions on Russia over Navalny's death. What more can you tell us about whether that might translate into some meaningful action?
Sarah, the EU is currently discussing a 13th package of sanctions against Russia for the invasion of Ukraine. And coming into today's meeting, a number of member states are in support of imposing sanctions over the death of Alexei Navalny. We know, for instance, we were just listening to the EU's chief diplomat over there on foreign policy, Josep Borrell. He said that Vladimir Putin and the regime should be held accountable for the death of Alexei Navalny. In the past, the European Union has targeted individuals over his arrest in 2021, for example, and it is likely that they will target institutions like the prison system. We got a hint of that, and individuals operating in that system, they will be targeted with travel bans and asset freezes. Many member states put the blame solely at the hands and feet of Vladimir Putin, but he is not likely to be sanctioned by the European Union. Instead, these will be more symbolic sanctions targeted against individuals working in and around institutions like the prison system in Russia.
And Navalny's widow, Yulia Navalny, what more can you tell us about her meetings today with EU foreign ministers?
Sarah, she's had a number of meetings here. She began with, of course, the Foreign Affairs Council, that is all the 27 foreign ministers, where she spent about 20 minutes with them. She then went on to meet the EU's Council President, Charles Michel. That meeting lasted about 10 minutes. And then she's had a number of bilaterals lined up. I know she's met with the Belgian Foreign Minister, for example. This is a woman taking the message to leaders and officials here that she wants to continue her husband's work. They were pleased to have an opportunity to personally convey a message of condolence, to show support and empathize with her at this moment of time in her grief. But she is here to deliver a message about how the opposition, civil society in Russia can be supported. After meeting with the foreign ministers, Borrell said in a post on X that the EU would continue to support civil society as well as media, independent media in Russia.
DW correspondent Christine Mundwa, thank you. Now, the threat posed by Russian disinformation campaigns has been in the spotlight ever since the United States accused Moscow of interfering in the 2016 presidential election. Following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Western concerns over the Kremlin's propaganda have grown. One of the countries most susceptible to Russian disinformation is its Baltic neighbor, Latvia, which is home to a large Russian-speaking minority. Even before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Latvia banned some 20 Russian media outlets, but Russian TV channels are still accessible via the internet and satellite. Latvia is a former Soviet republic and is now a member of the European Union and NATO. It has expressed concerns about a possible attack from Russia. And for more on Russia's disinformation efforts, we are joined now here in the studio by Agnese Logina. She is the Latvian Culture Minister. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us here on DW News.
Thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here.
I would just like to ask first for your quick reaction to our top story today. We have been hearing from Alexei Navalny's widow. She has placed the blame for her husband's death very squarely on Russian President Vladimir Putin. Do you share that assessment?
Yes, very much, and that's also what our president, Edgars Rinkēvičs, has said on social media, that Navalny is, in fact, killed by Kremlin, and I would like to add that Navalny is just the most recent case in a rather long list of Putin's opposition killed by his forces.
And we're seeing the information that has been coming out of Russia, right? Because, I mean, the family has been blocked now from seeing the body. They are trying to get access. How are you viewing how Russia is framing this story to the outside world and to its own domestic public?
I think that it is very important to really keep in mind that this is not the first case that something like this happens, that Kremlin is dealing with their opponents the way they know how, which is by killing them. And we need to keep in mind abroad that indeed Navalny is just the most recent case in a rather long list of such killings, and starting with Anna Politkovskaya, with Boris Nemtsov a few years ago, and others who were killed by Kremlin. And the message that we need to send out is of strength. That's the only language that Putin and his regime can understand, and the only way how we can send out the message of strength and that show that we are, as Western world, we are strong, is by supporting Ukraine and making sure that Russia loses in Ukraine.
Information and disinformation is disseminated in so many languages, no matter which country it's coming from or, which actor it's coming from. But I'd like to ask you specifically about your large Russian minority that you have in your country. And when they're hearing stories, for example, from Russia about the government or perhaps about Navalny's death, for example, how are they affected, and what are your concerns in that regard?
First things first, Russian minority in Latvia is not a homogeneous group. It's a large group of people with various values. A lot of them are very glad to live in a democratic, free, independent country with free, independent media. And the way we're strengthening Latvia is by making sure that our media stays free, independent, and accessible to everybody.
There's also a number of initiatives on the EU level as well. How are you then working also with your with the EU as a counterpart in order to combat disinformation?
We're working very closely because there are a lot of things that we can do only on a European level, such as making sure that Russian propaganda is not spread abroad, because of course we in Latvia, we know very well that war starts with information war, and that people's minds is the first frontier of information war, and we need to make sure that people have access to independent information that is objective, that is editorially checked, and that is free. And we need to make sure that they're not that this Russian propaganda is not freely accessible everywhere, and that is a lot of work that we have to do together. And we're happy that our colleagues on the European level also see that and are agreeing with us.
You, as a country, in the Baltics, you were out front from the very beginning, very long time ago, with regard to Russian aggression in the region. How good are they at this? How good are they at disinformation? And how high is your concern right now?
Mm-hmm. We always have felt that disinformation is a very serious threat, and that we have to counter it by making sure that society's media literacy is high. We need to very much invest in media literacy. We also need to invest in making sure that our legislation is up to date. We live in the era that is going to be marked by AI as well. We need to have legislation on AI because this is another tool that can be used by people who are not democratic in their ways and that are not fond of democracy, and they will use it to make sure that the elections that we have this year are the last democratic elections, and we have to be very, very aware of that. And this is a very serious threat. So we in Latvia, we very much know that, we are aware of that, and we are taking all the necessary steps in order to strengthen our mediascape. And we just passed this year in January, we passed the law that is going to merge Latvian public television and radio. So we're going to create one new entity of merged television and radio, which will help to consolidate efforts in fighting disinformation.
Thank you so much for joining us here to tell us a little bit more about those efforts. Agnese Logina, as we mentioned, you're the Latvian Minister of Culture. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.